Hi, everyone. My name is Sylvine, and I work for the 27th Region. We are a French public innovation lab. Very quickly, since 12 years, we explore ways to transform public action, mostly through research and action program. And to introduce the conversation, like most of you probably, we've been struck in the multiple innovations that were brought by the COVID crisis. In terms of creative bureaucracy, they underline the responsiveness of public agents and the inventiveness of public administration.
Call, I was like, wait to call. Yeah, now I hear them. Yeah.
Can
okay. It's not gonna last long, this thing, no.
Maybe
no, it's not an iPhone.
Maybe can you all close your microphone?
It's a OnePlus. It's another telephone. You have iPhone.
I think it's yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So very quickly, the idea of this conversation and this talk is to share practices of public transformation during the recent COVID crisis, and to draw from this the learnings in terms of how can we make our administrations more resilient in line and in front of future crises, and what type of learnings of coherence and collaborations between public transformation and resilience can we draw from these practices. So we propose you to share an investigations we've launched at the 27th Region last May to explore what type of public transformations have been accelerated through the crisis, and what type of scenarios can we and learnings can we draw from this, and also to share the concrete practices of 3 cities and territories during this crisis, so namely Paris and the Resilience Office, Medellin and the Resilience Office as well, and the North Ayrshire County in Scotland. So very quickly, I will give the floor to my colleague Louise Curillo, who will introduce Reflex Public.
Hi, everyone. Just quick words about Reflex Public, which was the programs Sylvine introduced you to. So we've launched this project in May this year. We've worked with around 50 public agents on 20 local authorities or public administration, and we structures our investigations around 6 transformation areas. The first one was citizen participation, the second one contributory democracy, something around internal management, territorial and institutional cooperation and decision making, and one about acceding to public rights and administrative process. On these big transformation areas, we focused on around 20 investigation fields. This was some small phenomenon we could observe in different contexts. For example, in citizen participation, we focuses our attentions on the participatory budgets. In France, many local authorities has launched participatory budgets. Some of them stopped the budget during the crisis. Some of them pursue the budget, and we wanted to understand why and how this happened. Maybe we can go to the next slide. We wanted to present you 3 examples of forecasting scenarios for more resilient public administration. This all investigation aimed to identify future scenarios of transformation. So we worked with designers also to design some concrete public policies or concrete objects of public policy instead of big strategies. So in order to make it more clear or more tangible as a vision of the future of public administration.
So the first scenario was tackling the topic of internal management. In many public administration, there was a lot of transformation in the internal organization and in management topic. And one of the field was the reassignment of public agents toward new tasks to cover sanitary urgencies. So for example, some public agent from Public Innovation Lab were reassigned to hospitals or to organize the certain ways of dead people, etc. So the idea is how can we develop micro mobility policy that is sustainable on the long run. We have focused on the human resources side in this idea, and try to question how to sustain a new human resources culture based on valorizing the versatility of public agents, their capacity to adapt to changing context, and also to enhance a sense of commitment. So usually public agents are assigned to one task. So how can we valorize their capacity to assume multiple tasks, and can you value this as an asset for public agents? So the idea behind this is to set schemes, public policy schemes, to anticipate changes within public administration, and to organize a temporary reassignment of public agents during tense period. So it's, for example, the idea of having a human resource policy to detect, to promote, and to develop secondary capabilities. So to help public agents to recognize what is interested to them personally, what are their personal talents for reassignment. So to develop a personal reassignment plan that can be developed and mobilized during future crises.
So one of the other transformation area is the citizen participation during the crisis. So we focused on a consultation process in tactical urbanism. With the end of the lockdown, local governments have transformed public space to match new sanitary requirements, such as new bicycle path, pedestrianization of certain space. And the issue was immediately to recompose the uses without jeopardizing the functionality of public space. So we observed the rising of what we called tactical urbanism, a concept flirting between planification and responsiveness. The reason city and metropolis could react so quickly is that they were prepared. Often they use the context of the crisis to accelerate pedestrianization and cycling policies. Indeed, tactical urbanism doesn't come out of nowhere. If cycle paths were rise in one night, they stand for a long strategic pondering and a deep diagnosis work. This outcome arises also thanks to work habits forged within the local government, as well with other partners such as bike organization. However, tactical urbanism brought also the risk to freeze the temporary development, and because some temporary urban developments has been DIY'd in emergency by the city services without consultation and with the same stiffness as long-term development. On the contrary, others has been brought up in dialogue with users' organization on previous diagnosis and in the perspective of evolving experimentation. So the question is, how will these features will be received by the various users? So pedestrian, motorists, cyclists, local residents, etc. So here stands an issue: how to conciliate strength and flexibility in order to adapt the urban setting according to their appropriation and potential conflict of use. So our idea would be to feature an ex post citizen participation in the process of tactical urbanism. So the need for responsiveness in these types of development has not eliminated the need for user involvement. And so that's why it's very important to broaden the scope of the user participation in this project, both upstream to initiate dialogue before the crisis, in particular by mobilizing them in the preparation of the plan, but also downstream of the development.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, and the last pass we wanted to present you was the local resilience schemes on the investigation area of contributory democracy. What we've been looking at during the crisis is a lot of cooperation between the non-profit organizations and the public authorities, and especially for very urgent needs like distribution of food for people in needs and emergency assistance. And what was interesting is that this cooperation was very in a thin level. Every day it changed. It was very dynamic operations. And at the beginning, the non-profit organizations were very fragilized by the crisis because they didn't have access to their resources like buildings, like the people that could not engage during the crisis because they were fragilized by the crisis. And at the beginning, the public administration were very strong helping these non-profits. And from day to day, they transferred the charge of this emerging assistance to the associations because they were able to take back the work. And so we've identified something like a direct help from the public administrations toward this word of associations. And it analyzed also the interdependence between public players and local associations. So it acknowledged and support the independence between the interdependencies between public players and local association, activists, and citizen groups. What we've thought about was this local resilience schemes is public policy that prevent the kind of situation where the associations are almost disappearing because very weakened by the context. And we thought it could be a public policy built with the local association in order to identify what are the needs for this association to be more resilient and to build together logical supports or general coordination between different associations that struggle to enter in connection between them. Okay. So just a word to conclude about Reflex Public. The project is still in progress. At the moment, we are working on this future path we've just presented to you, and we've also had 15 of the paths we're working on, and we are very eager and happy to have your feedback about this. And Sylvine, if you want to.
Yes, so that's 3 paths among others that are on the way to be building and designed, but it's also object for conversation. So we will post also the links that describe the work more in depth. It was a very brief presentation. And the idea is also to propose to our network to adopt some of these ideas and to test them. And so we are also very eager to know if you've been already in your own administration testing ideas that are quite similar, or also to have your feedback and experience on this. So it's also the object of this conversation within the Creative Bureaucracy Festival, also to gather and share experiences. So I will now introduce the second part, very concrete from this roundtable, and give the floor to three public servant and elected representative. So they present also in each of their own territory how they have been tackling the crisis and several aspects of transformation that we have been listing earlier, namely how to build new forms of alliance with citizens to tackle the crisis, how to develop a stronger cooperation within a territory, how to change decision-making process, etc. So I will first give the floor to Noémie Fontpéril from Paris in France, who is head of the Resilience Office of Paris. Noémie, it's yours.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Good. So, well, I have 10 minutes, so I won't be very precise on how the city of Paris has gone and is still going through this crisis, but just to give you a context from where I speak. So I'm at the Resilience Office. Our role is to elaborate and implement the Paris Resilience Strategy to adapt, survive, thrive in front of different types of crises. They can be shocks like the one we've just and we are experiencing, and they can be also more chronic crises that fragilize the city as a whole and all its components in the long term. So we think of social cohesion, social inequalities, pollution, etc. So our role is to coordinate the city. So it's in many ways everything that happens before the crisis, to prevent it, to prepare for it, and also what happens afterwards. How do we learn from the crisis, and how do we bounce back afterwards? So we've been very attentive during this whole period, and we are still attentive, and this partnership with the 27th region has been very fruitful as well, to understand better and to have some distance with what we were going through and what we are still going through. So just 2 words about what our colleague Lina Liaku might have already said in her session that was called Resilience by Design, I believe, but our DNA, let's say, as Chief Resilience Officers, is to work on how to integrate resilience in the design of our public policies, from strategy to very local projects and specifications, for instance, on the field. So the idea is for me, is to see, in terms of public policies, to seek a situation or a way to practice where we have, in the end, no regrets in terms of not being prepared for the next crisis, not being prepared for ecological crisis, for social health crisis, etc. So the COVID pandemic revealed strengths and weaknesses, and we have looked at it with our lenses, which are the lenses of the Paris Resilience Strategy, which has like 3 pillars. To be short, the people, the infrastructure, and the governance. And we have looked at for each of the 35 actions that compose this resilience strategy, what the crisis revealed in terms of citizen engagement. So we did this kind of observatory work in terms of housing, in terms of help for the most vulnerable, in terms of public finance, which is a great deal for all of us, I guess, in terms of institutional cooperation, etc. What we observed in terms of how to better share the power, let's say, with others within the territory, and including with the what we call the action, public action in common. We observed that the role of NGOs, as Louise Sylvine has said, was very important, that they were highly impacted, but that they were also in the front line and before the crisis. And I want to tell you about this one experience in the next minutes I have. Before the crisis, we started to work on what we call les volontaires de Paris. So it's a citizen reserve, which in some other cities actually already existed, in cities that are really exposed to crisis. So we took example of what's happening with the city emergency response team in New York, or what Christchurch and Wellington in New Zealand had already put in place to face an earthquake, etc. That's actually the added value of this network that we are part of, the Resilient Cities Network, to grasp also some ideas from abroad. So the idea of this program is to train, give tools, empower, give resources for people to actually be able to act and be active, including during a crisis, like being active on a daily basis to respond to daily emergencies, to go and help homeless people, elderly people, to help with greening the city, or whatever task we can suggest that they conduct. It's a program that was designed by the volunteers themselves. So they actually wrote themselves a chart, like a specification. What does it mean to be a volunteer, a citizen that volunteers for his or her city? And they defined this through two pilot programs that we conducted in the 4th and in the 10th arrondissement district of Paris, where they experienced themselves what it meant. Did they need by any means some to be acknowledged for this role, or all these legal questions that came with the fact that they were along with public servants acting to deliver for the general interest. So, for instance, we had volunteers during the COVID that went to distribute. There was a big call for solidarity that was launched, so they went for food distribution. They distributed water as well during the heat wave for homeless people. There was distribution of hydroalcoholic solutions, and they also conducted a whole awareness campaign on behavior and barriers for the COVID. They were trained by the Red Cross, so the NGOs are also partners of this program. We have many partners, and the idea is that at some point, so we have 6,500 volunteers today, and the idea is to include them. If we go to the last point of my presentation, which is perspectives, we want to include them more and more by training them even more, giving them even more tools, and also exercise with them so that the people can be really active even in crisis management with the city, and not afterwards. so that they can be from the beginning able to respond. And today we have lots of simulation or exercise that we conduct with other institutions, the state, the city, but there are no citizens involved in that, no NGOs involved in that. So the idea is to have much more open governance on how we prepare for the crisis, for the next ones, for this one, but also for the next one. And in the long run, it's also an opportunity to better cooperate on a daily basis and on daily issues. I guess that's it. I didn't check the time actually, so I'm
No, you're very good.
You tell me.
No, you're very good. If you want to say a quick word about the learnings from this experience, like and how you're continuing this work right now.
Yeah. Well, so this work was tested in 2 districts before COVID. Then it was generalized right before the COVID, and it was very active during COVID for food distribution and everything. And now the idea is to structure that and to make a link with what you said earlier on what you suggested on the local resilience schemes. I think this idea is really interesting because it's indeed at the level of the neighborhood and at another scale that these ties can be built in a way. We always think that for a global crisis we need the global answer, but in the end it's when we go deep into the detail of what happens, who knows how to cooperate with who at the very local level, that it can make the difference. So one other perspective that we have is to work on resilient neighborhoods or resilient street level resilience. And we have anyways, we have some tips on that, and same thing, always same methodology, work on a pilot or 3 and see how it works and see how to replicate that.
Super. Just thank you very much, Noemi. Just a very quick word on organizational level, because we have a very short time. We will have 3 presentations on a row, and then we will divide into smaller groups. So if you want to ask more questions and to go deeper in each of the example, you will have 30 to 40 minutes once the main roundtable is over. So to follow up with this idea of building new islands, alliances, and new capabilities of citizens to co-produce public action together with local government, I would like to give the floor to Joe Cullinan from North Ayrshire in Scotland, focusing more on community wealth building and on how to develop new collaboration with pillar institutions on the territory. Joe, the floor is yours.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. So thank you very much for inviting me along and to ask us to contribute based on our community wealth building strategy in North Ayrshire. It's building on the work that has been done in other areas such as Cleveland in America and Preston in England. So we are not the first to adopt a community wealth building strategy, but I think fundamentally it's very important as we now face the economic and social crisis that COVID is going to present for all of us across the globe. So just to start, we see this very much as an intentional approach to change our local economy. It's not just about community empowerment, it is about who owns the economy, who does the economy work for, does it work for people, communities and planet? And this slide in particular is just to highlight that the current economic model which we live through, this neoliberal extractive model, has left North Ayrshire, a coastal community in the west of Scotland, with 1 in 3 children living in poverty. It's left us with the least resilient local economy in the whole of Scotland, so 1 job for every 2 people. And as the previous speaker was just talking about, we also face the climate emergency, and the current economic model is absolutely not going to see us through the impending climate emergency. We are going to have to take some very quick and decisive action to change how the economy works if we are to give the planet a chance to survive. I'm going back the way now. So what is community wealth building? It's about using the economic levers available to anchor institutions, and I'll touch upon who anchor institutions are in a minute. But it's using economic levers available to us to develop a resilient and inclusive local economy. It's a new economic model. It's focused on enhancing well-being and inclusion, and not just measuring economic performance on traditional measures like GDP. And it also means more local employment and a more diverse and resilient business base. So what we mean by that is more cooperatives, more worker-owned businesses, more social enterprises, businesses which have a different value set from those who are seeking profit. And the whole purpose is to try and ensure that wealth is owned and created locally, is shared for the benefit of local people. There are 5 pillars to community wealth building, so procurement, fair employment, land and assets, financial power, and plural ownership. And anchor institutions which take forward those 5 pillars are really, in most cases, the local state, so the municipal government, the health service, other public bodies. But really an anchor institution, in effect, is an organisation which is embedded in place. They are loyal to that place and they are not going to leave that place behind, unlike capital and unlike the big multinational companies. They buy a lot of stuff, they employ a lot of people, and they own a lot of land and buildings. And they will be different for different places. It'll be different anchors. So what happens in Cleveland will be very different from what happens in North Ayrshire in Scotland. So what we want to do with community wealth building is to support the whole council ambition to make North Ayrshire a more fair and just society. We have went through a period here of a 2-year journey to get us to this stage. So last year, working alongside your colleagues in England, the Centre for Local Economics Studies, we undertook a report study into the potential for community wealth building in North Ayrshire. We set up a community wealth building commission, which has local and regional anchor institutions. So it has, for example, our local NHS, the health service, represented around the commission. And that's very much focused on the practice of community wealth building and how we turn that into something which does benefit people and communities. And we have engaged with our wider communities and internally within the council on this agenda. So we have set out a strategy in May this year. We launched it in May because we know that coronavirus and COVID-19 is a public health crisis, but it's also an economic and social crisis, and we need to prepare ourselves for the impending crisis that we're about to face. So that strategy that we launched in May has 55 actions across the 5 pillars, but also a strategic sort of mission for us as a council that we will work across all our services and work across all our wider local and regional partners to implement the first community wealth building strategy in Scotland. On procurement, this is about how does the local state use its existing spend to design a new economy. So yes, we want to spend more money with local businesses, but we also want to spend more of that money with a generative business ownership model, so cooperatives and worker-owned businesses. The fair employment pillar is how we as big employers within our local areas can use that power to try and create a better labour market. So can we, for example, tailor our recruitment policies towards people who are living in poverty? Can we offer training and job opportunities to groups of people in society who struggle to access the labour market? So single parents, people with disabilities, etc. So it's an intentional approach to try and create a fairer labour market. Procurement's a monetary resource that we have at our disposal, but we also own lots of land and lots of buildings, and we want to see that used to create sort of a more productive use that benefits the common good. So we will be looking to see if we can transfer pieces of land and buildings to community ownership, for example. Financial power is about how do we use any financial levers that we have to invest in our local economies in a different model from that traditional extractive inward investment model. So for example, our strategy looks to create and establish a community bank in the west of Scotland. That would be owned by its customers and able to create new finance that would be invested within the local region. And finally, that plural ownership bit is about ownership. So we do not want our local and regional economy to be owned by people who are based in the Cayman Islands, for example, and extract wealth from our local communities. We want our local and regional economy to be owned by the people. We want it to be cooperatives. We want it to be social enterprises. We also want to establish new municipal sort of business models. So, for example, we'd love to have a municipal bus company again in North Ayrshire. And that is what we hope to achieve through that pillar. We're starting to put some of the community wealth building stuff into practice. So yes, in terms of the response to COVID, there was a big response in North Ayrshire about making sure people could access food. And we're looking at how that can then transition into a longer term sort of food system, which has dignity at its heart. One of the photos in this slide, however, is with a group within a locality in North Ayrshire, and that group is an allotment group. They grow food. And what they are on this slide for is because we spoke earlier on about participatory budgeting. In Scotland, we do participatory budgeting as well, but it's been very small grants distributed towards small community groups in most parts of Scotland. But what we've done in North Ayrshire is we've set up a community investment fund, and we've delegated the power and decision-making over that to our locality partnership, which is local elected members and community reps coming together to work for the good of their own locality. And that money has been used by the Free Towns growers to create a new training hub at the allotment site. So there is an example of how we are bringing the financial levers that we have as a council and also the land and assets that we own to create something for the common good that the community can own, the community can run for people. We've got some next steps in terms of our journey. So one of them is that we are recruiting new community wealth building staff, and we're creating a community wealth building team within the council, which is looking at how do we use community wealth building to drive community-led regeneration? How do we connect the position of procurement with the business support team so that we're looking at how we can animate the local market, look at local supply chain opportunities, etc. We have the commission that I spoke about earlier on. We've just agreed this week on an anchor charter, which will mean that the councils in Ayrshire, the NHS, the health service, the police and fire, the college, they will all now sign up to a suite of pledges which looks to build and retain local wealth through community wealth building. We have an expert panel, which is really progressive. It has people from the Democracy Collaborative in America, but also a host of think tanks and economists from across the UK. And finally, we have the Ayrshire Growth Deal, which is our kind of version of what's called in the United Kingdom city deals. And basically it's a pot of money that's given by the UK and Scottish governments for economic investment. It could be used in the old traditional inward investment model, but for us in North Ayrshire, we want to see the whole growth deal as a community wealth building opportunity. There's £250 million in that growth deal, and we want every single project within it to go through the 5 pillars of community wealth building so that the investment lands in our community for the benefit of the people and the communities. And I've got one final slide, which is just to say that we may have launched the community wealth building strategy in May, but it's allowed us to then look at how we recover and renew from the COVID crisis. And what we have done is we've taken the principles behind community wealth building and adapted them to a local Green New Deal. So we're looking at how we can use an investment fund that we created before COVID-19 in our budget to invest in municipally owned renewable energy. How do we create a green jobs fund? How do we look at tackling vacant and derelict land within our communities? Etc. So that is all to match up with the fact that we have twin priorities in North Ayrshire really now, which are community wealth building and an ambition to reach net zero by 2030. I've tried to stick to my time. I've probably run over a wee bit. I usually take about 20 minutes to run through that slide, so there's a lot of areas that I've not covered, which I'm happy to start to enter into as we go through the discussion. But thanks very much for the opportunity to come along today, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's a very interesting and very systemic approach connecting economic and social resilience. So I think it was good to share, but also it builds on past crises, industrial crisis to tackle new crises. And it's probably something you have in common with Medellin in Colombia. And so I can give the floor to Santiago to share their experience on building on previous, notably security crises and how to co-decide with local stakeholders. The floor is yours, Santiago.
Thank you, Sylvine, and everyone for the invitation. Finally, I decided to bring a small presentation. It will be very quick, and I will share with you 3 or 4 principles that we clearly use during, and we're using right now during these shocks and stresses created by COVID-19. And the first principle of all of them was applying an inside look. And it was on the 6th of March when we had our first case in Colombia, and the governor and the mayor came together and said, and called upon every team and said, what should we do right now? And normally in this type of events, which are really very unclear of what should be done and what kind of strategies any administration should follow, that was the first principle. Let's not look outside for responses. Let's look and let's have an inside look of what we have inside. What do we have in our development plan? What do we have in our institutions? What do we have in our communities to be able to respond to the shocks and stresses created by this event? And in practical terms, in our case, was an scenario planning. We were conducting, at the time of COVID-19, we were conducting our planning process for the next 4 years. The city, but also the provincial government. So the mayor and the governor said, let's look at what we planning right now with a different lens. Is how can those programs, strategies, and projects that we planning can help us for the future, responding to COVID-19. And the principle was was very simple. We can't plan anymore in paradise. Our entire reality is changing, so let's change our planning process. And we actually redefine our planning process with two directions: in a scenario of pandemia and a post-pandemia. And I'm gonna go very quickly with this, and I'm sure it's in Spanish, but you understand it. We look at our evidence in terms of different indicators of human development and quality of life, and cross that with information about the loss of jobs, industries, and all of that, and quickly understood that the shocks and stresses were going to amplify our current issues of human development. So with that, we applied what we have already in our resilience strategy to identify programs and projects that were designed to help human development, but now with a COVID perspective. So one of them is, this is the development plan that we were drafting during that time. And then we decided to call Antioquia Resiliente and Medellin Resiliente, that those programs that show, after a very clear process of assessment, that had a great potential to attain COVID-19 shocks and stresses, we were going to prioritize them. So this was a major action taken from what we call top-down. From the development plan that we designing, let's focus and prioritize what could help us to attain COVID-19. And this is one of the most amazing programs. We're right now under the construction of 10, between 8 and 10 food markets. So we are applying all the principles of this planning process that for these major infrastructures and programs to help us reactivate the economy, but also many other social dividends when you plan this attending COVID-19. But secondly, and a second principle was very simple, and it was at I will never forget that. On the 6th of March, we were sitting on a table, the city and the provincial government trying to figure out what to do. And it was not easy. And the second principle was, public institutions won't be able to solve these issues. We require all the forces of society. This is a societal issue. And if we don't solve it together, we probably going to really spend time, human resources and economical resources. So because our city has had an amazing experience of bringing upon community leaders, society, but also different sectors to support what we've been designing as our strategies to defeat narco-traffic and violence, it was very simple for the mayor and the governor to call upon what was called the intersectorial committee that comes together every Friday. Normally, we had a table like this. It's called CUE, Comité Universidad Empresa Estado, a committee of academia, entrepreneurs, and public institutions coming together. But because COVID-19, this is the new intersectorial committee every Friday, with the mayor sitting on his office, and every single CEO of the major institutions, the head of the major university and think tanks, but also civil society organizations sitting together from 2 to 8 p.m. every Friday to design the strategies for the next week, but also for the coming months. We knew that without the help of an intergovernmental and civil society, but also private and academia participation, we wouldn't be able to properly attain the shocks and stresses created by COVID-19. So bringing again the sense of co-responsibility. We as a society, we have to participate in the responses and to be part of the solutions. And one of those solutions was very simple. Private companies said, we will pay our local universities to design our own ventilators to solve the issues in our hospitals. So it was an innovation, a strategy designed by the academia, the private companies, and together trying to find a solution that was an immediate need. We knew that we needed close to 1,000 ventilators before the 30th of April, or between the end of April and March. And when we look in the market, there was not availability to buy those ventilators. So we decided we conduct the research and we will design them and we will develop them. Without that principle of responsibility, this was not a possible solution. And the third principle is...
Santiago, I will need to cut you very quickly, but we can continue afterwards. The live stream will stop on the Creative Bureaucracy Festival website in 2 minutes. So I just wanted to wrap up very quickly this first part of the session by thanking everyone, and we will definitely share on the website the presentation, the links, etc. But even though the live stream is stopping, we can continue on this trend. So I will let Santiago finish his presentation, and then we will not divide into groups because it will take too much time. So we will have maybe 20 minutes for additional questions and sharing of experience. Is that okay?
It's okay. So very quickly, and the third principle was community intermanagement. We knew we required the help of communities and the knowledge of communities and all the organizations, local organizations and civil society organizations to participate in that. And this is a very simple example of that. We had no time to go house by house to do a census of who was really under vulnerable conditions. And community designed a very simple strategy, was called red flags. Whatever family felt under threat because COVID-19, just give us a red flag on your house. So we will know you require attention and you will require a careful look from the society. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Santiago.